Yay, and we're recording. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the 2024 Klett and Flag webinar series. This is a collaboration between Klett Publishing, Klett World Languages Publishing, and FLAG, the Foreign Language Association of Georgia. My name is Meredith White, and I am the current president of FLAG. We are delighted to start this series. And the first one, if he's on this side for you, he's on this side for me, is Dr. Jerry Parker. Jerry?
All righty, let me get everything together. Share. Hold on, come back. Okay. Everything good? You can see that? Yes.
I can see your desktop. It did the switcheroo thing we were talking about.
Let's see.
Which is the story of my life.
I know, right? I knew I'll have. Let's see. Let's try again. One, move you here. Okay. 1 and 2. Okay, now can you see?
Now flip them. Same thing.
Dang. Try it again. I knew.
I'm telling you, if I had a dime. Or I'll switch to PowerPoint and then the little button is different. So then I'm like, no, I don't want that one. Come on. Yay, now we can see it.
Okay, cool. All righty, let's start. All right, cool. So, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dr. Jerry Parker, and I'm a faculty member at Southeastern Louisiana University in Hammond, Louisiana, and I also serve as an adjunct assistant professor of Spanish at Morris Brown College, located in Atlanta, Georgia. So, I'm representing for Georgia here. And tonight's presentation is Leadership and Administration in World Languages. So to give everyone kind of a layout of where we're going to go with this, I'm going to first start off with a little bit of contextualization of world languages, where we are right now in our field. Then I want to shift a little bit to talk about leadership. What is leadership? How do we define leadership? What does it mean to be a leader, and aspects of leadership? And then I want to get into leadership in world languages specifically. So what does it look like to lead within world language programs? And then I'm going to touch on administration. We're not going to get that much into it tonight, but I do want to just graze across it to kind of show the difference of leadership, administration, and then we're going to talk about management as well. And I want to say whatever time we have left over to get into some discussion and questions and answerings about what is leadership in world language education. So just to give everybody a background about all of this idea comes out of my current thoughts on world language education, and the fact that we talk about curriculum, we talk about the type of lesson plans we use, what kind of curriculum, pacing guides, so on and so forth. We talk a lot about instruction, communicative language teaching proficiency through reading and storytelling. We talk about all these beautiful aspects of instruction, but rarely do we ever get into conversation on leadership. What does it mean to lead a world language program? And for me, this is where my research agenda is now going in and also my thoughts on what it means to be a world language teacher these days. So my background coming to this, my positionality, if you want to call it that, is that so I have a doctorate of education in educational leadership. I am currently pursuing a master's of public administration from the Southern University at A&M College, and I focus a lot of my work on public policy, so and the public policy making process. My first master's degree is in French with a bilingual concentration in Spanish, and then my bachelor's degree is in French as well. So across my career trajectory, I started off in just world languages, and I moved into the more leadership administration realm. And now I'm kind of, once I finish this degree, I'll be able to mix them together and move forward down the path. So I've been teaching for 15 years now, believe that or not. I started off very, very young. This coming school year will be my 16th year in the classroom. I've been an administrator since 2017, and currently at Southeastern, I serve as a faculty member in French, Spanish, and world language education. So I do teacher prep. And then I also serve as the director of the Foreign Language Resource Center. And then I also serve as the undergraduate program coordinator for my department. So within those two tasks, my research as a faculty member focuses a lot on issues of curriculum, instruction, leadership, and administration in world languages, so in world language programs, and also just general higher education. And just as a point of reference of how I kind of maneuver myself in this field. I actually was named the 2023 Louisiana Foreign Language Teacher of the Year. So somebody somewhere said I must be good at this. And then I was also a SCOLT finalist for Teacher of the Year. So throughout my career, I've always worked for excellence. I've always strove for excellence. And I was always trying to figure out how can we make this better? So I question every time I enter into the classroom, every time I enter into world language programs, maybe other people's programs, where are we going with this? When I think world languages, my first start is, well, the student comes in, what are they going to do? The student comes in, they have no idea about a world language, never met a person that speaks a second language. What are they going to do with this? Where are we going with this lecture today? How can for me in higher ed, how can my criminal justice majors go somewhere with this? How can my biology majors go somewhere with this? I ask this question now, and as we go through all of this, I want everybody to kind of think about this and rethink about this and think about it one more time. Where are we going with these world language programs? What are we going to do with these in 2025, 2026, 2027? I know many of us are at the point where we're looking at maybe leaving the field. For those of us who are going to stay in the field, for those of us who are on the line of leaving, we need to answer the question of where we're going with this. So, and I definitely apologize for this one. The next slide does have pretty pictures. This one doesn't. It was very hard to kind of make a pretty picture out of this one. But what you see right now is the current state of world language education in K-12. So this is the number and percentage of public and private high school students who graduated who took a world language class. So, and you'll see it from 2000 is the first column, the middle column is 2009, and then the last data set we have is 2018, and this comes from the National Center of Educational Statistics. So I only report back the percentages of, but if you want the raw data, they do include the actual number counted on the full data set from the National Center of Educational Statistics. So if you look in the first column at where it says Spanish, and then it's any credit, so that any Spanish class is taken, 60% of high school graduates took Spanish. 46% took two, as in level one, level two, or whatever your school calls it, of Spanish. And then 18% took three levels, graduated with 3 levels of Spanish. And so those are really okay numbers for what we were in 2000. You saw an increase in 2009 to 69, 55, and 24, and then we're still trying to pull the data from 2019. I think the issue there was COVID happened, so we can't really measure, because how they measure these numbers is a year after they happen, and 2020 happened right after 19. So, but you see the same in French, 17%, 13%, 6.4%, but then you see a decrease. Right? We're seeing less people taking French, less students taking French in 2009. And if you look at 2019, the number decreases as well. Same with German, same with Latin, same with Italian, there was actually an up and a down. And then with Japanese, there's a straight just slope down. What is this showing us? That the number of students overall in world languages, they're not doing that great. We're not graduating that many students with a world language course. And if you look at higher education, the current state of world languages in colleges and universities, the left-hand side here is Spanish. So you'll see an increase, a decrease, an increase, a decrease. I'm pretty sure we're going to see another increase soon, and we're going to see a decrease. Just looking at data trends. If you look at French in the top right of your screen, what you'll see is French has steadily decreased across the years. What in there's about 83 to about 91. We were kind of stagnant there, if you want to call it stagnant. And then from about 93, all we see is steadily decreasing. German, the same thing. You see a increase and then a just decrease across the years. Now, why do I bring this up? Because there are two things going on here as it relates to leadership. Number one, K-12 needs higher ed needs K-12. K-12 needs higher ed because the K-12 teachers have to send the students somewhere. The K-12 teachers they need the higher ed as an endpoint, but also The K-12 teachers need higher ed because that's what's making the new language teachers. To make a new language teacher, you need to want to graduate with a degree and come back and teach. Higher ed needs K-12 because that's what's building our programs. Without us having high school graduates to come into our bachelor's degree programs, our programs at the university level fail. And again, we can't make new teachers if we don't have high school graduates coming in our program. So we do balance off of each other. And a lot of people, especially when they talk to me, I've had the privilege of working in both K-12 and higher ed, and both have their drawbacks and their pluses. So it depends on what you prefer as a person. But what I will say is that both sets are teaching the same exact thing. Both sets are, I promise you, hola sounds the same way in Spanish 1 and in Spanish 101. There's no difference in hola. And same with bonjour and whatever else. And a lot of teachers say, well, you don't have behavior problems. Colleges do. Colleges and universities do have behavior problems. They just look a little different. So again, and this is one thing I've always said, we always divide ourselves into two separate camps, but we're the same camp, right? So we as a field have to work together. Hence, leadership is very important. So to provide a little bit more perspective on where all of us, K-12 and higher ed, have come as a field, I wanted to kind of give some historical development here. So world language education pre the mid 1900s, what you'll see here is that from the 1800s to about the 1900s, when people were learning languages like that, we were learning them for reading the great works. When you learned a world language here in the United States, you were trying to read the original work of some famous person from some country. Then in 1958, we had the Language Defense Act. And in that act is when there was the first ever time the federal government put federal funding behind a world language. So any world language that you wanted to learn, well, most world languages that were popular at the time, you could do something more than just learn it to be able to read it. This is what we saw, the emergence of language labs and going in the lab, listening to the tapes, and all the exposure to the language started to grow. Then in about the 1980s, 1990s, and these decades are a rough guesstimate. If you look into the actual research on it, there are definite years of certain things. So about the 80s and 90s, we start to see growth in language teaching methods. This is the first time we ever sit down and start actually researching. If you do it like this is what's going to happen. If you do it like that, that's going to happen. Now, mind you, there were methods out before the 80s. People were doing this research before. This is where we saw the most growth, though. Then in the 1990s, we see this boom in communicative language teaching. Again, it was around before the 90s. It didn't boom into the 90s, as in you saw it probably in all 50 states, within multiple school districts, within multiple colleges and universities in all the 50. Then in the 2000s, we saw growth in computer-assisted language teaching. Now, if you remember back into the 90s, computers weren't what they were by the 2000s. And so this is why, again, I say growth rather than we just saw it emerge. Computer-assisted language teaching had been around since the 70s, 80s, 90s. But the actual boom, everybody's doing it, was not until the 2000s. Then in the 2010s, we saw increased awareness of comprehensible input. And everybody knows, if you've been alive within the past 10 years, CI teaching, being a CI teacher, teaching proficiency through reading and storytelling, the growth we've seen in people using those methods is relatively new to our field. So where are we going with this? My prediction, my own personal opinion, I think we are seeing growth right now in AI-assisted world language teaching. So artificial intelligence, we're going to see growth in that as well. Also within virtual teaching, virtual world language teaching. So this is going to Zoom calls and so on and so forth. And then we're also going to see growth in virtual reality driven language teaching. Within the next 5 to 10 years, and people will say, yeah, I think the robots are going to take over. No, I don't think robots will take over the field of education, but what you're going to see is more standardization of the usage of AI and virtual reality and virtual spaces to teach languages. For us, my personal opinion, I think we're going to see increased contact with the language, and we're going to see better results if we have tech savvy people. So one thing I also want to mention, if we go back just a little bit, one thing to keep in mind with the study of world language is that it also intersects with what's happening in society at that moment. So if you look at these charts and look at the time frames, so let's go with German. Germans saw that tip of decline right after World War II because of everything that happened in World War II. Same thing with French. French saw that decline in about the 70s because of Vietnam. Same thing with Spanish. Spanish sees an increase and a decrease because of waves of immigration that were happening from Latin America. And if you trace this around with all languages, you will definitely see the trend. And it's documented in research that whatever's happening in international affairs in America mirrors, do people want to study the language? Do people not want to study a language? So just a correlation to keep your eyes on. So in understanding our field and the development of our field, one last piece of the puzzle that I think is very important to talk about is, as it concerns leadership, is the generations leading current programs. And again, we're still in the thought of contextualization, what is going on in our field. And if you read anything about generation research, you are going to be happy to hear this. Right now, we're now thoroughly understanding that the time frame in which you were born and the time frame in which you were raised plays a humongous role in how you view the world, right? For me, I'm a millennial, right? Born between 1981 and 1996. So the way I came into this world, there were things that my parents, one is a baby boomer and one is on the cusp of baby boomer Gen X. My parents had things in their world that I don't know anything about. Likewise, there are things in this world that came out that my parents don't know anything about because it came up while I was a child. So my parents and I view the world completely differently in respects to certain things, right? When it comes to leading an organization, when it comes to being a good coworker, the idea of coworkerness, quote unquote, looks different for a millennial than it does a Gen X and it does a baby boomer because of the way the corporate world, for us, the educational world, has changed. Back in the day, prime example, back in the day, teachers did a lot more sharing of resources because we had to go to copy machines and we had to do this and we had to do that, and we had to really team up. Now, we don't even have to talk to each other. We just send in an email. So imagine, and that's for millennial teachers. Baby boomer, Gen X, and millennial teachers, really. Imagine what Gen Z teachers are going to do when they have video chat world. They were born into a world of video chat. So, in understanding the way people lead, how schools are the way they are, it really depends on how the person that is leading views what is proper and right. Now, one thing I don't want to kind of get the generalization going of, if I'm a millennial, I do have traits of Gen X. I do have traits of the baby boomers. I can adapt traits of Gen Z. I can adapt traits of Generation Alpha. So just because you weren't born in a certain time period doesn't mean you don't understand something. Prime example, the way Gen Z maneuvers the world, baby boomers will probably have a hard time because they're just so far along in life, and Gen Z is so young that they're just thinking on two different wavelengths. Me as a millennial, I can kind of pivot into everybody's group. My grandpa, who's a baby boomer, he and I kind of have some similar thoughts, but we also have some different thoughts on a lot of things just because of my age versus his age. My grandpa is about 40, 45, 50 years older than me. And so the way he maneuvered this world for 40, 45 years before me is completely different. So in understanding that, now I shift us to leadership, right? In understanding that our field is shaped by all those forces going on. One of my favorite leadership authors, Michael Fullan, in his book, Leading in a Culture of Change, in citing Mitzberg in their 2004 work, states that leadership is about energizing other people to make good decisions and do better things. Effective leadership inspires more than empowers. It connects more than it controls, and it demonstrates more than it divides. And again, that's Michael Fullan, Leading in a Culture of Change. If you ever get a chance to meet Michael Fullan, tell him Jerry Parker is your biggest fan. I love Michael Fullan's work because that is so true about leadership. And people commonly think, oh, a leader, that's the one in charge. No, leaders are people that inspire others to do the good work. Leaders are those who take control of a situation and say, hey, let's get the goal accomplished. When you think of a leader, and there are good leaders and there are bad leaders, when you think of leadership, think of the person who steps out in the front and brings everybody together. That is good leadership. Now, you also could have someone who steps out in the front and divides everybody. That's bad leadership, but it's the person who steps out in front, to make a simple definition. So one thing about leadership that I didn't even know until my doctorate program was that you can have multiple types of leadership, what they call leadership traits, leadership approaches. There are multiple leadership theories. There is no one way to define leadership. There's no one way to be a leader. And if you look at the research on leadership, everybody finds their way in some way, but in multiple ways of leadership. And what that means is you can be charismatic, transactional, and situational all within one day, depending on how well you understand what each of them is looking to do. So, for example, a charismatic leader is someone who we're in a faculty meeting and they come up with these great ideas and we implement them. Very charismatic, they go off the cusp, but they know what they're doing. Versus a transactional leader, if you come in every morning and you bring me coffee, I'll make sure that you are teaching all the good classes. And I mean, there are some better examples than that one, but it is transactional. If you do A, I do B. And I will say with transactional leadership, that it depends on the person's motives and goals there, but there are some times where transactional leadership is necessary to get the job accomplished. Situational leadership, in some situations, the leader is not the leader. In some situations, they have to step back and let their staff or the teachers or whoever, let them step up and take over. And my job is just to provide support. Servant leadership is something that I think is just fascinating. The idea of you serve everybody under your leadership, you literally flip the idea around and everything they need, you give them to support them through their time working under you. Transformational leadership. How do you take a teacher who scores ones on all their evaluations and move them to a 5, right? How do you take a below average teacher and make them excellent? That is transformational leadership. And then authentic leadership, a person that just really wants to lead. And there are other types of leadership. This is just a slim down version. My love, my heart, my passion, my soul is curriculum leadership. I love curriculum leadership. I think curriculum leadership is the heart and the soul of any school, and it is to me, the most important form of leadership. That is very biased, I will admit, but it is. There's also instructional leadership, which a lot of ed leadership programs focus on a lot, how to lead within the instructional space there. So again, I highly recommend trying to figure out what your leadership style is, and that will take you forward. Now, one of the things to talk about in the conversation on leadership and world languages, because again, we're still contextualizing what should we be doing. Leadership is the idea of you moving the people along. Management is the idea of moving the leader's vision along. And a lot of people confuse the two because you can be a good leader, but a horrible manager of people. You can have these visionary ideas, and really truly know how to just move the foreign language department, the biology department, the school, if you're in a school, forward. But when it comes to actually making the vision that you created happen, you have to also be a good manager or hire a good manager. So I want to make sure I underline there is a difference between leadership and management. And in going into a leadership position and thinking about leadership, you have to thoroughly understand the difference between the two and where you're standing, because you might think you're a leader when you really are a manager. And that's two separate things. Just keeping that in mind. So all of that to say, well, what about world languages? Where are we going in world languages? So there's actually an article that is going through its final production stages right now that I published called World Language Educational Leadership, Research Trends in an Emerging Field. So here are the emerging trends. And it's going to be published in the Journal of Second Language Teaching. And in the article, I conducted some data analysis and I came up with these 7 themes of world language education leadership. So what's so special about these themes? If I'm a world and language education leader and I'm trying to advance my program, I'm trying to move my program along, per Parker 2024, as of next month, per me, these are the 7 things you need to focus on. These are the 7 things you need to look at. These are the 7 things that you need to think about in terms of continuous improvement to be able to advance your program. Now, again, curriculum and instruction are things we've talked about for years in world languages, but there are other pieces of the puzzle that principals, department heads, teacher leaders, whatever the title of the person in charge with the vision that's going to move it forward, whatever their thing is, they need to focus on these 7 areas. So I'm going to go through now. There's another article that I published related to these. So I'm going to present some quotes that I present in this other article related to these 7 areas. So this other piece that I published in the International Handbook of French Education, which just came out, in this book, I published an article with one of my former students, Trent Threaton. And in this article, our book chapter, we talk about how to advance specifically French programs through what is called the four frameworks by Bowman and Deal. And within the 4 frameworks, they talk a lot about how to lead a program, thinking about it from 4 different ways. And so what Trent and I did was we thought about leading programs through the 4 different frames, French programs specifically. So these quotes come from specifically French, but we're adapting them tonight to world languages. So as it relates to advocacy and language access, one of the things I say is positive outcomes require collaborative efforts among stakeholders, including policymakers, educators, and learners. And what that means is if you're leading the world language program, you have to talk to people. And I don't know how else to say that. One thing I noticed in world languages is we talk to each other. The French teachers talk to the Spanish teachers, talk to the German teachers, but we don't talk to people outside our program. And another thing there is stakeholders need to know their role and responsibilities to help departments identify opportunities for collaboration and leverage strengths and expertise. And I think about the work that I've done so far in the MPA program. And one of the parts of learning about public administration is understanding the role that legislators play in that. And when you think about an elected official, they don't really know much about foreign languages unless they were a language teacher. But we could flip it the vice versa. I don't really know much about math more than what I took as a math student. I don't know much about chemistry more than what I took as a chemistry student. So I could say the same thing about biology. I could say the same thing about English literature. So it's our job as the leader to actually talk to these people and let them know, hey, what you're about to do in your bill, the legislation y'all are about to pass, the funding you're about to cut, this is how it's going to affect me and my program. What you'll learn in dealing with the public elected officials is that they have a duty to the public. You are a member of the public. Curriculum, adopting curricula that aligns with the program's goals, values, and the needs of the students. Again, my soapbox on curriculum leadership, when I think, and I talk about this a lot in my research and I wrote about it in my dissertation, curriculum for world languages is typically a textbook. There are some teachers that they go from page 1 to page 30, and that's the whole semester, whole school year. There are some school districts that have these elaborate, fancy curriculum that they bought offline, and it's so amazing. My question to both sides of that fence is, but what does this do for your students? Is it just you get to do fancy things and have them sit in groups all day and talk about, I don't know, Juana la Loca? Well, that's nice, but 5 years from now, what are your students going to take from that lesson? Are your students actually going to be able to put that language skill that you're teaching in their working memory? Will that actually be effective? Is that something that they need to know? There's a difference between teaching level 1 and level 4. if you're teaching level 4 content in level 1, you're just wanting to talk about grammar. If you're teaching level 1 content in level 4, you're just doing the language just to say it's being done. And that is not helping anybody. You need to align your curriculum with what the social and societal needs of your students are. For me in Louisiana, I need to be teaching things that my students in Louisiana are going to actually use. So, for example, we have this conversation all the time. In French, the verb skier, to ski, in Spanish, esquiar. Why would I ever teach that when I know my students are never going to ski? But hunting and fishing are never taught in Spanish they're taught. Well, in French they're taught too. Fishing is taught, but hunting is not. But in Louisiana, our motto is Sportsman's Paradise. It's on all of our license plates. So I need to go find the word for hunting and teach it to my students because they're going to go hunting, right? That's adopting and adapting curriculum. As the curriculum leader, these are the questions you should be asking and the train of thought that you should have toward trying to improve your department. As it relates to instruction, high quality programs emphasize research-based instructional practices such as communicative language teaching, task-based language learning, and project-based learning. And one of the things that I've come to realize about our field, some of us took a methods class, some of us did not. Some of us came into language teaching because we always wanted to be a French teacher, Spanish teacher, German teacher, Chinese teacher, Arabic teacher, Afrikaans teacher, whatever, Japanese teacher. Some of us came into language teaching because we changed our major later in our career. Some of us picked up the language and passed the praxis. All of those people are valid language teachers, and I'm proud of all of us for making it to the classroom and actually sharing this beautiful thing called bilingualism with our students. But unfortunately, our trainings are different. And within that, it's now your job as the leader to understand, well, did this new teacher that I just hired, did they ever take a methods class? If not, I can't penalize them for not understanding what communicative language teaching is. What I can do is try to work to improve their understanding of it so we can implement it better in this program. That is instructional leadership. When it comes to student motivation and engagement, and we have to remember, one, the research on motivation in world languages tells us that student motivation is the #1 factor as it relates to a student's ability to learn a second language. If a student is not motivated to learn anything from your class, they will not learn anything from your class. That is it. Now, will they take things away? Yes, they will, right? That's the hidden curriculum. They will take some things that you said, they will take some things that you did. But if they walk in and say, I don't want to learn Spanish, and they are motivated to not learn Spanish, they will not learn Spanish. That's just it. Engagement promotes enthusiasm and support among students. When you engage them in that class, they want to be there. That motivates them to want to stay in your class. We have to start creating activities and doing activities that allow our students to engage with the language. Coming in every day, opening the book and just reading from the book, and then telling them fill in the blank with correct conjugation of the verb or do a worksheet. It's a practice. It's a teaching practice. But how can we make that more engaging? How can we make that more effective? As the leader of the program, how can I diffuse innovations down? Which is, side note, there's a book called Diffusions of Innovation. There's a thing called Diffusion of Innovation Theory by Carl Rogers. And in that is how you make that work. You as the leader are going to diffuse out all these strategies to engage your students. You as the leader understand that student engagement is what moves your program forward. Showcasing the strengths and achievements of your program attracts new students. You as the leader have to set that vision that at the end of the day, my program is good. We believe this program is good. If you believe it long enough, it will be good. It probably is already good. Let's make it better. So for example, if you go to Instagram and go to Southeastern_WLC, that's our Instagram page for the Department of World Languages and Cultures. When I became director of the Foreign Language Resource Center, we had no social media page. And so what I decided to do was become very knowledgeable of how social media works. Now, 2017, social media wasn't a big thing. So we were just doing what everybody else was doing. Since 2020 and the growth that we've seen in social media, I have become very knowledgeable of social media data analytics, the trends on how to post using hashtags, and so on and so forth, what kind of images people are looking for. I've done all that kind of work because as the leader of that resource center and being the one who's over the Department of Social Media, I understood that showcasing the strengths and achievements of my program is going to attract new students, right? People don't know what they know. So how will people know it's good if you don't tell them? Prime example, every time the McRib comes back, what does McDonald's do? Every commercial you see, the McRib is back, the McRib is back, the McRib is back, the McRib is back. They have to let you know it's back for you to know it's there. Eventually, somebody's going to tell you, oh, the McRib is back and it's really good. You should try it. You have to showcase the strength of your program. And that could be so and so won an award, so and so did a good job. Now you're seeing on our social media, we're taking pictures of what's happening in our classes because people want to know. People want to know, should I take your class or should I take this class? In K-12, when it comes to that level 3, you become an elective for them most of the time. And so if they don't know what you're doing, displaying student work in the classroom or having programs and so on and so forth, they're going to pick somebody else as their junior and senior level coursework. So, going toward the back end of this, online learning, I will say no disrespect to my boomers and my Gen Xers, but online learning is really a kind of 90s thing. In terms of when we move from correspondence, mailing the packets to actual computerized learning in a real active environment. And so in online learning, we all have to catch up. I'll tell you, I never used Zoom actively until COVID hit. I knew what it was, I knew how it worked, I had used it before, but I wasn't getting on Zoom calls every single day until COVID hit. So we all have to throw away well, we just didn't do that when I was a student. And we have to get into the mindset of it's not going away. Computers are not going away, technology is not going away. We have to become knowledgeable. And for the leaders of world language programs, providing adequate resources gives your faculty tools to experiment with new teaching methods, technologies, and new curricular and pedagogical approaches. I will also add into that training them on these new tools. You can give teachers all kind of fancy stuff, but you have to teach them how to use it, one, and show them some innovative things to do. I think once you do that, that is when your teachers will say, oh, well, let's start to do this. What feels safe for them? Then they will start to add on new. But as the leader of a program, you have to work to integrate in that technology, that online learning piece. What we know so far, and what Trent and I suggest is that online learning leads to a more dynamic and engaging learning environment. And for those of you who are kind of stuck on how do I get started, open educational resources, OERs, are a great place to start. They're free, openly licensed resources that you can use their videos. For my French teachers, the Tex French series from the University of Texas at Austin, very great videos, very, very great resources, free. I use them in my online foreign language classes. You just put the videos in there and I create a whole bunch of questions and the students watch the video. They're like 2 minutes long so they can actually remember things and they're very level appropriate and you just ask them some questions from it. And that's how you're able, and that's an asynchronous class. So that's how you're able to get them to interact with the language. Um, in Spanish, there are a whole bunch of OERs out there. I know I use Libro Libre, which is out there, but there are all kinds of resources out there. I highly recommend OERs. And what we know about online learning is that it leads to a more dynamic and engaging learning environment in the sense of the students are doing more than, hey, lean to your shoulder partner and say this thing that you would never say to them. With integrating YouTube videos, for example, into your teaching, what you'll then have is the students seeing real life play out. Real people are walking down the street doing a certain thing. Um, Also, one of the areas that I discovered in my research, and Trent and I talk about within our book chapter, is what I call special populations, but the other term is diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. And one of my soapbox on DEI work, because I started off as a critical multicultural educator, I always have to say that we have to get out of the mindset of DEIB work is all about race. Diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging has a piece about race, yes. However, all of DEI work should not be based on race. That's a whole field of study by itself in anti-racist teaching, so on and so forth. A lot of times teachers will take what we call culturally relevant pedagogy, culturally sustaining pedagogy, whatever you want to call it, and they flip it into a conversation on race. And the issue there is that you're only secluding, literally segregating this one piece of the population away from all of the pieces of the puzzle. And I definitely I challenge all world language educators as we think about what does DEIB look like in our field, that we look at everything there. One of my fascinations with DEIB is definitely accessibility needs. How do we make world languages to where students who might be vision impaired, hearing impaired, have a neurological difference, how do we make our classes to where they can participate as well? That's one of my personal things that I'm working on. But with DIB, diverse groups lead to better decision making. In your leadership, you also want to have what we call diversity of thought. You want to have people from multiple backgrounds. You also want to make sure that when you bring people to the table, none of them look alike, think alike, or whatever slash you want to use. Something is different about each person there. Age-wise, the most important thing to remember as a leader, when you come into a leadership situation, the oldest people there are your most useful tools because the oldest people there have organizational history and organizational knowledge. What we were doing in 1995 didn't work because of such and such. My mom always tells me this. She's been on her job for 25 years and 20 years. And what we were doing 10 years ago, these new people come in and say, oh, let's try this idea. It didn't work 10 years ago and it's not going to work now. Why? Because of checkbox, checkbox, checkbox. You as a new person don't know what those checkboxes are. Right. So you have to go to the elders. You have to go to them. You want that diverse group of people to tell you where you're missing your blind spots. So people from different backgrounds bring different perspectives and experiences to the table. And you also have to have that diversity of thought because it leads to thoughtful, well-rounded conversations. Again, you want to think about socioeconomic status, rural versus urban. That is something we don't think about in world languages, but for me, I live in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. So I am in a very urban area, but my school, Southeastern, is in Hammond, Louisiana, which is an urban area. So my experiences here are completely different than my students who are from the Hammond area. And so the way I plan my lessons, the way I think about things, I have to retrain my brain to think, okay, you grew up with this, and this. They didn't. So, for example, Whole Foods is 10 minutes away from my house. For them, they have to drive to the next city over to go to the nearest Whole Foods. So I can't use all these examples from Whole Foods when I could use local grocery stores, Walmart, Target, Rouse's, which is a Louisiana-based grocery store. So last but not least, teachers. When you step into a leadership role and thinking about leadership, you always want to think about your teachers. When it comes to teachers, peak performance is the result of a teacher's ability and motivation. If your teachers show up not wanting to be there, they're not going to teach like they want to be there, and your students won't learn anything. The most important thing to nourish is the teacher first. From there, these special populations, online learning, and everything else I've talked about, that is when you focus your efforts on the rest of those things. But you need to make sure you have high performing teachers. You need to make sure you have mentally healthy teachers. You need to make sure you have financially satisfied teachers. We can't really do much about finances. However, the other things we can at least try, right? We can at least try. And so, hence, if teachers are not motivated or are dissatisfied with their job, it can lead to a lack of engagement and effort in the classroom. And again, this is how you get the throw everything on the board and go, play on Facebook teacher, or the let's watch a bunch of YouTube videos, you'll get it, I don't care teacher. Leaders, one of the big things about being a leader, especially in world languages, you have to learn to take yourself out of it and think about the people that you're leading. So, last piece of the puzzle, and I said we're not going to talk much about leadership. I'm sorry, administration, but I did want to kind of mention it. Administration versus leadership, they're two separate things as well. So, administration is the actual implementation of policies, overseeing daily operations, and ensuring the organization functions smoothly within its established framework. And then leadership is the art of motivating a group of people to act towards achieving a common goal. So, well, what's the difference? The administrators usually report to boards or report to somebody else who's created a whole bunch of policies and procedures that have to be followed. The leader creates a vision within that. So you can be a leader and an administrator, but you're wearing two separate hats as a leader and an administrator. Administrators have to follow rules. Leaders are setting a vision for the future. So just kind of keep that in mind. And that is actually where my research is going now. How do we administer world language programs within the construct of federal and state policies within K-12 and higher education? So more to come on that. So, and I just want to give everybody a visualization of administration, just because a lot of people don't really they need to see it visually. So when you think as a K-12 teacher, well, how does my administration work? You a teacher on the ground, then you'll have your lead teacher or your head, your department head, depending on how your school is structured, your principal and then your superintendent. So the principal and the superintendent are both leaders and administrators. Your teacher leader and your department head, they could be an administrator depending on what they're doing, but they are going to be a leader because they're setting the vision for the department. In the university setting, the president, upper administration, the provost, upper administration, the dean is considered upper administration at most schools. The department head is called middle management there. But they also are the leader because they're setting the vision. And then the faculty members are the teachers. So just kind of give everybody a visual of what we're talking about there. So, the last thing on administration, which is just kind of just wanted to hit on this, is the idea of new public management, which is a new thing coming out in administration studies. So, what you'll see there is that we're moving away from traditional formats of administration within public institutions. So, anybody that gets federal and state funding is a public institution. So, public schools, for example, public universities, for example. And within that, anybody who leads is a public administrator. So you have to think about your values. You always want to be flexible, creative, and think of an entrepreneur in an entrepreneurial mindset. And that's because we live within a capitalistic society. So everything's about advantage. You always want to take risk as an administrator. You have one of my dear friends Natalie tells me all the time. You have to know the rules to be able to break the rules, which is true. If the policy says this, it does not say this, and this. So technically, you didn't break the rules if the policy never said it. And one thing you'll learn about policy studies is nothing is implied. If it's not there, it's not there. Accountability for a public administrator means data. And this is why we do so much standardized testing, because the administrators have to show us via data that what we're saying is happening in your school, in your university, so on and so forth. So accountability, think data, and everything can be a form of data. And then also you want to make sure you have decentralized structures, partnerships, and contracts. Basically, let everybody contribute, break outside of the school and work with other people, and also make sure everybody's on the same page with what's the actual negotiation that we came up with dealing in those partnerships. So I circle all of that back to the original question as it concerns leadership and administration and world language programs. By the fall of 2024, so you have the summer, where are we going with this? And I question all of you to think about that in terms of the leadership of your department. If you are the leadership, if you are moving into leadership, if you are questioning the people leading your department, where are we going with this? After understanding all of what I just talked about, where are we going? Where in the classroom, right? Where are you going with your teaching? In your unit, where are you going with this? And I think once we start to answer that question, that is when world languages will be on par with STEM, on par with really STEM, in terms of the funding piece, in terms of the societal importance piece of standardizing us within the curriculum. So there is my contact information. Feel free to add me on all social medias, contact me, email me, anything you need. I'm always open to conversation and dialogue. I'm just here to help. So thank you.